Welcome back to our reading of John Owen's The Mortification of Sin. We're into chapter 4, principle 3. The life, vigor, and comfort of our spiritual life depend a lot on our mortification of sin. Strength, comfort, power, and peace in our relationship with God are what we desire. If any of us are asked seriously what bothers us, we'd have to refer it to one of these categories. Either we lack strength, power, vigor, and life in our obedience and relationship with God, or we lack peace, comfort, and consolation in that relationship. Whatever might happen to a believer that doesn't belong to one of these two categories doesn't deserve to be mentioned in the days of our complaints. Now, all these things depend a lot on a constant practice of mortification, which we'll now discuss. 2. Why life and comfort depend on mortification. A. Mortification alone keeps sin from depriving us. Mortification is the only thing that keeps sin from taking away our blessings. Every unmortified sin will definitely do two things. A. It will weaken the soul and take away its energy. Or B. It will darken the soul and take away its comfort and peace. 1. Unmortified sin weakens the soul and takes away its strength. Unmortified sin weakens the soul and takes away its strength. When David had an unmortified lust in his heart for a while, it broke all his bones and left him with no spiritual strength. That is why he complained that he was sick, weak, wounded, and faint. He says, "There is no soundness in my flesh," Psalm 38:3. "I am feeble and sore broken," verse 8, "so that I am not able to look up," Psalm 40:12. An unmortified lust will drain the spirit and all the energy of the soul, and weaken it for all duties. This happens because, first, unmortified sin messes with the heart itself by getting its affections tangled up. It distracts the heart from the spiritual mindset needed for strong communion with God. It grabs hold of the affections, making its object beloved and desirable, and in doing so pushes out the love of the Father. 1 John 2:15 and 3:17. This means the soul can't honestly and truly say to God, "You are my portion," Psalm 119:57, because it has something else that it loves instead. Fear, desire, and hope, which are the main emotions of the soul and should be full of God, will somehow get tangled up with the unmortified sin. Second, unmortified sin fills the thoughts with plans about it. Thoughts are the great suppliers of the soul, bringing in provisions to satisfy its affections. And if sin stays unmortified in the heart, those thoughts will constantly be making provision for the flesh to fulfill its lusts. Romans 13:14. They must show off, decorate, and dress up the objects of the flesh, and bring them home to give satisfaction. They are incredibly good at doing this, especially when serving a dirty imagination. Third, unmortified sin breaks out and actually gets in the way of duty. The ambitious person must be studying, the materialistic person must be working or planning, and the sensual, vain person must be getting ready for vanity when they should be engaged in worshiping God. If we were to go into detail about the damage, devastation, weakness, and destruction that just one unmortified lust can bring upon a soul, this conversation would be much longer than I intend. 2. As sin weakens the soul, it also darkens the soul. It's like a cloud, a thick cloud, that covers the face of the soul and blocks out all the rays of God's love and favor. It takes away any sense of the privilege of being adopted by God. And if the soul starts to gather comforting thoughts, sin quickly scatters them. I'll say more about that later. Now, in this regard, the strength and power of our spiritual life depends on our mortification. It's the only way to get rid of the unmortified sin that won't allow us to have any strength or power. People who are sick and wounded under the power of lust try many things for help. They cry to God when their thoughts get too overwhelming, but they are not freed. It is pointless for them to use many remedies. They shall not be healed, Ezekiel 47:11. So Ephraim saw his sickness, and Judah saw his wound, Hosea 5:13. and they tried various remedies. Nothing will work until they come to acknowledge their offense. 5:15. People might see their sickness and wounds, but if they don't make the right efforts, they won't be healed. B. Mortification trims all of God's graces. Mortification trims all of God's graces and makes room for them to grow in their hearts. The life and energy of our spiritual lives comes from the strength and growth of the graces of God in our hearts. It's like a garden where the precious herb is planted, but the ground isn't taken care of and the weeds grow around it. The herb might still live, but it'll be poor, withering, useless thing. You have to look and search for it, and sometimes you can barely find it. And when you do, you can hardly tell if it's the plant you were looking for or not. And even if it is, you can't make any use of it. But let another of the same kind be planted in the ground, which is naturally just as barren and bad as the other. Let it be well weeded, and everything harmful and hurtful removed from it. It'll grow and thrive. You can see it as soon as you look into the garden, and have it for your use whenever you want. That's how it is with the graces of the Spirit planted in our hearts. It's true that they're still there. They stay in the heart where mortification is somewhat neglected. But they're about to die. They're withering and decaying. Revelation 3:2. The heart is like the lazy person's field, so overgrown with weeds that you can barely see the good crop. Such a person might search for faith, love, and zeal, and barely be able to find any. And if they do find that these graces are still active and sincere, they are so weak and weighed down by lusts that they're not very useful. They're still there, but they're about to die. But when the heart is cleaned by mortification, and the weeds of lust are constantly and daily pulled up, since they grow daily with nature being their proper soil, then there's room for grace to thrive and flourish. Every grace will play its part and be ready for every special use and purpose. C. Our peace. As for our peace, there's nothing that shows sincerity without mortification, and I don't know anything that has as much evidence of sincerity in it as mortification does, which is a big foundation for our peace. Mortification is the soul's strong opposition to itself, and in that opposition, sincerity is most obvious.